I want to talk about the theory of adaptation, recovery, and readiness in a little bit more detail. We're going to use this really simple example to get across a fairly complex topic. So let's say I have a readiness, okay? And I have a readiness of arbitrary score of 9 out of 10. I don't ever give 10 out of 10, so just 9 out of 10, okay? The question is, what makes up our readiness? Well, our body is very robust and has some level of redundancy. So we'll call it subsystem 1, subsystem 2, and subsystem 3. 1, 2, and 3. And they're all working together to maintain a 9 out of 10 readiness. But in reality, you can think about these almost like reactors. They're never operating at 100% effort. Well, not all the time. So let's say I have a stressor imposed upon my body. All right, and this stressor, we'll call it X1, is applied to me. And I want to be able to maintain my 9 out of 10 readiness. Well, all these subsystems before were just operating at 50%. And let's pretend now they all have to operate at 100%, okay? Because we had a stressor. But we were at 50%, and now we're at 100%, and we're able to still maintain our readiness of 9 out of 10. So even though I feel like a 9 out of 10, I am actually working harder internally from my subsystems, but I don't have any feel of that because my subsystems are meeting those demands. Now what happens if we get hit with another stressor, X2? X2 hits the body. Well, we might be able to be a 7 out of 10 because what's happening is these are already operating at 100%. And you can use an example of clearance to understand this. So imagine I am cooking on my stovetop. I'm gonna draw a little picture. I have smoke coming out of my pan because I often burn my food. And above my pan, I have a fan. We'll just draw a little fan. We all have those fans in the kitchen. And if the net smoke creation is equal to the net smoke extraction, we have a net accumulation of 0. No smoke is in the room. But when the smoke becomes greater than the ability to extract, we start to have a net accumulation. So maybe we have a net 2 of total smoke beginning to accumulate. Now that's what's happening up here to my readiness. My subsystems, or my fans, which act to support my readiness, or maybe you can think of it like the fan that's clearing out the smoke, and the smoke is the stressor. It's working as hard as it can, but it's not able to clear out all my fatigue. So I'm now at a 7 out of 10, but my subsystems are working really hard. Now this is the whole idea of delayed fatigue and accumulation of somewhat overtraining. And it starts with not the readiness, that's the last thing we feel, but it starts with these subsystems, and that's where things like HRV, omega wave, and some internal metrics might be very beneficial to help monitor. Now what happens is the recovery of this also happens then in the inverse. First, we have to reduce the stressor that's being applied. And then these subsystems will eventually be able to extract like all this smoke out of my kitchen, just like the fan, and they can return back down to that 50% category. So what we see here is like a traditional recovery curve. We have a stress, and then we have a recovery and an adaptation. That's a macro visual of it. We have these subsystems, we'll call subsystem 1, 2, and 3. This really poor drawing, we're gonna draw them really quick, are going to be occurring at different times. So they are going to be recovering at different rates and speeds relative to the macro. So even though we might have a macro feeling readiness of 9 out of 10, that doesn't always mean that our internalized systems are also at, recovered state of ability. And so that's kind of a very, very, very short example of what is a dynamical systems theory of fatigue, recovery, and adaptation, and the process of how we can adapt to training, maybe optimize training to adaptation by optimizing and identifying some of these subsystems and learning how they are operating to affect the macro outcomes. Because a lot of times we get a macro outcome, and I like to call that the last needle, was it the needle in the haystack? No, that's not the right one. It's the last straw on the camel's back. And we often blame the last straw, but we ignore all the other straws on the camel's back that accumulated. We're so often just ready to blame the last straw, but in reality, it was the accumulation of straws that caused the issue. So I hope that makes sense. I appreciate you guys listening. I hope you enjoy, and take care.